So, Alan, Morgan has a question. How is the contract for a seller's inspection handled? Is it any different in terms of wording than a buyer's? And who's typically paying for the inspection? Is it the client, the agent?
Okay, two great questions in there. First of all, in our world, the contract is the same for the buyer as it was for the seller, and they're the same all the way around. So everybody gets the same contract. So we keep it nice and simple that way. And in terms of who's paying for the inspection, it can be the agent, it can be the seller, it can be the seller up front who gets reimbursed by the agent on closing, or it can be split 50-50. So there's any number of ways of doing it. Those are four common ones. In our market, the most common is the agent pays for the inspection, and it's part of their package offered to the seller to help win the listing at the beginning of the negotiation. So that, as I say, is the prevalent but not the only way to do it.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. And Jaithan would like to know, do buyers trust seller pre-listing inspections and agree to waive their own home inspection as a condition for the transaction? Or do buyers have their own inspections after the pre-listing?
I'm going to say the answer is both. So a lot of people in our market trust the home inspection, and I'm going to be bold here and say if it was done by Carson Dunlop, because we have a strong market position and a good brand awareness and a good reputation in our market. However, some buyers still get their own home inspection. So it depends very much on the individual at the other end. So if they're familiar with your home inspection company and comfortable with it, or their agent says, yeah, you can trust these guys, they're good, then the buyer may accept the inspection report from the seller at face value and forego the inspection. If they have any reluctance or they want a second set of eyes, always a good idea, and they may get their own inspection. So I'm going to say in our market right now, given the tremendous competition for houses, we find people very often rely on our reports and don't bother getting the next inspection. But partly market conditions, and as I say, probably partly the reputation and the brand recognition.
Thank you. And we've got a trio of questions from Carl. First, do you find sellers find it difficult to cough up the inspection fee themselves?
Absolutely. Um, Everybody has trouble paying money in advance for something that you don't know is going to be terrific value. So when people go to buy a cell phone, they know what they're getting. When they go to pay for a pre-listing inspection before the house has gone on the market, they don't know what the result is going to be. So sellers are inherently reluctant to do that. And it comes back to my answer to the previous question. It's why very often the agent finds it easier to agree to pay for the inspection rather than try to convince the seller of the wisdom of doing that when the seller's new to the whole process and the agent is really the professional who's been through it, who understands. And the agent understands that if they win the listing, the size of the prize is much greater than the cost of the inspection. So it's an investment that agents are typically willing to make, but it's a really good question because the sellers are not so willing to make the investment because they're not familiar with the process and they're unsure of the return on investment. So understandably so.
Thank you. And this one's a bit more BC centric. Do you feel that Hiabc is going in the wrong direction with not helping out the buying process by not allowing sellers to disclose to buyers?
I don't really know enough about the situation to have a strong opinion, and apparently Alberta has gone in the same direction. So I haven't had enough conversation, and there's always more to a story than meets the eye. I would say on the surface, I think it's a shame that, and I think the buyers and sellers are missing out. But again, there may be more to it than I understand. So I can tell you, I'm grateful that our market does not work that way. And I don't know whether this is long term. My suspicion is that what we're seeing in British Columbia and Alberta is probably not a trend based on everything else that I know. But hey, I've been wrong before. I'll probably be wrong again.
Thanks, Alan. And one last one from Carl. What do you feel is the biggest liability to the home inspector?
The biggest liability in a pre-listing situation is that the buyer is going to rely on the report, and you have not had a chance to establish a relationship or build rapport with that buyer. You don't know who the ultimate buyer is going to be. So, as we've talked about in some earlier presentations, at Carson Dunlop, we are maybe old school, but I'm really passionate about having, in a conventional pre-purchase inspection, the buyer accompany us on the inspection. And I think that is a great communication experience. And it also builds a relationship between the inspector and the client. You don't get that in a pre-listing inspection where the ultimate buyer is someone you haven't yet met. It's why I really like the on-site review. I think that helps to mitigate the liability. I don't think I talked about that in the presentation, but the advantage of that follow-on on-site review or follow-up mini inspection is that you do get to establish a bit of a relationship with the client. And I think that is a risk mitigation tool. So that would be, in my opinion, and I don't think it's a huge one, but I think it is a slightly increased liability that is related to the pre-listing situation.
Awesome, thank you. And Chris would like to know, as a new inspector, I'm wondering what you'd recommend as far as marketing to agents, to be reasonable, excuse me, to be reasonable to your presentation for the evening. Can you suggest an approach for a lesser experienced inspector, as with regards to pre-listings?
And it's a great question because it is harder for the newer inspector because they don't have the brand and the reputation established yet. So to be honest, if you're brand new, I might focus on buyer's inspections first and keep your powder dry on the pre-listing inspection as a second or third conversation, or maybe even a second or third phase of the relationship with the agent. So your initial challenge is to bring something to the table that causes an agent to change their behavior and try working with you. And so that in and of itself is a challenge. Now, you might argue that the pre-listing inspection is a possibility where you can bring something. If they're not done in your market and people don't get it, I think it's a fascinating discussion to have. And I have had some discussions with and some experience with new inspectors who have started it at the beginning and have used it as a door opener because they're bringing something that other home inspectors are not talking about to the real estate community. So I think it's tough because of the things that I mentioned during the presentation. There is a lot of messaging that has to be delivered, and it has to be delivered a little bit consistently. And it's hard for newer inspectors to get the ear of the real estate community consistently and persistently. But I have seen it done, and I've seen it done successfully. So there's probably no grand rule around any of this, but understand that those are the challenges. Getting yourself known, recognized, and respected is probably step one, and the pre-listing probably step two.
Awesome, thank you for that. Ivan would like to know any top line suggestions for coverage, insurance liability, things of that nature, Alan?
Probably a great idea to touch base with your errors and omissions insurance company and make sure there are no coverage differences. In our experience at Carson Dunlop, our insurance company is perfectly comfortable with it. But I should preface that by saying our insurance company is not one of the typical insurance companies for home inspectors because we have a broader range of business stuff, including Horizon, for example, including our education business, including commercial. We have a slightly different kind of insurance program. So I do think it makes sense to touch base with your insurer. Although, as I say, I've not heard of any issues or problems with performing pre-listing inspections from an insurance perspective. Great question, though.
Thank you. Nick would like to know, For targeting a top producing realtor, he had one help sell his house about 6 years ago. He recommended and had a partnership with a home warranty company where the home was warranted for the seller and then transferred to the buyer. I think that approaching him about pre-listing inspections might appear as a good opportunity to get some things fixed under such a warranty if they are discovered earlier in the process. Do you think it could backfire on me as a conflict of interest?
I'm not sure that's a conflict of interest situation. My experience with warranties, and again, well, I'm going to say I do have a lot of experience with warranties, but it's not exhaustive. It's not across the board. Generally speaking, a home warranty will not cover an issue that is a pre-existing condition. And it's one of the things that a warranty is designed to fix something that breaks suddenly. It doesn't cover stuff that wears out, but it covers stuff that breaks unexpectedly and suddenly, and often prematurely. If it's worn out and old, they won't cover it under the warranty typically anyway. So the home inspection process will discover things that are already worn out, broken, or old in the home, and those would typically not be covered by most warranties that I'm familiar with. So, and to turn it around on its head, just to make the point a different way, a lot of warranties are available at a very good price and quite good coverage if they are preceded by a home inspection that tells them about all the pre-existing conditions, so those are off the table in terms of any exposure that the warranty company has. Again, Brian, I can't give a short answer to anything. I apologize. I kind of go a level deeper every time. But
I don't.
yeah, I think that warranty question is a tricky one, and I am not at all convinced that the home inspection issues would be covered by the warranty.
Thank you, sir. And I don't think anyone minds that you being a bit verbose here. Everyone appreciates the detail. John would like to know, when it comes to pre-listed inspections, we've been talking heavily about agents, but do you ever find like clients just have a general interest, like, hey, I'm selling my home, I should get one for my own sake? Or is it usually pushed through by the agent? What's the take on that?
That's a fascinating question in the sense that we looked at that at the beginning, and how can I phrase this? Generally speaking, sellers are not terribly sophisticated about real estate transactions and the process simply because they don't sell their house every day. So in the early discussions that we had, most sellers couldn't get their head around the concept very comfortably. And so we have not pushed that, nor do we get very many clients reaching out directly to us about this, with the exception of those who have had a seller's inspection done before. Those people will come back to us and say, hey, we did this before, it worked out well, love to do it again. So we get those people in terms of client outreach on pre-listing inspections, but for the most part, it is driven by the agent, who is the professional consultant that the seller has engaged. And to reinforce the point from a different perspective, sometimes the seller wants to do something and the agent has their way of doing something and can talk the seller out of doing something like a pre-listing inspection. And I talk about this all the time on the buyer's side. When the buyer does all his research and goes on the web and finds you, the home inspection company, and says, oh, this is the guy I want to use, or this is the lady I want to use, and the agent says, oh yeah, they're fine, but I've got a better guy who's less money and he also does this. So the agent can very often sway the mindset of the client, whether it's a buyer or a seller, simply because the agent is the purported expert who's receiving a fee for the services they're providing. And so the buyers and sellers tend, for the most part, to defer to the advice of the agent, because if you're not going to listen to the agent, why did you hire them in the first place? So for those reasons, I think, and if the subtle part of the question was, should I be reaching out to consumers directly about pre-listing inspections? I think that's a tough row to hoe.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was a great question. Great answer. Now, excuse me. Mark would like to know, in a buyer inspection, we always recommend that a qualified contractor perform repairs and replacements. Do we make the same recommendations for a seller inspection? If not, the seller can save a lot of money by making the repairs themselves. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny. You're right. On the buyer's inspections, we usually recommend. Now, a lot of buyers do the repairs themselves if they're so inclined. So your inspection report might say it should be done by this person, but if the guy's uncle is a roofer, then he's probably either going to do it himself with his uncle's help or whatever. So I think the same thing works on the seller's side. What I am finding is, at least in our market, all the people who grew up being handy are now as old as me, and they don't feel like swinging a hammer or doing the work anymore. And I'm going to say a lot of the younger generation has no interest in doing the work themselves. So I'm seeing less and less do it yourself stuff out there, which frankly is not a bad thing in a lot of ways, because a lot of do it yourselfers discover how to do something and make every mistake in the book while they're learning how to do it. And by the time they get it right, they finish the project in their house. It's the only one they ever did, and they did it terribly wrong. So, and I'm sure you've all seen that. So, yeah, I don't think it makes a huge difference if, yeah, the pre-listing report says get this fixed, and of course, to protect ourselves, we always recommend a qualified specialist. But if they take it on themselves, as long as it's done fine, that's great. As we all know, it's not always done perfectly.
Thank you, Alan. And speaking as someone who has pulled Capcons out of their own apartment walls, doing some construction, I can concede to the fact that I should have hired a professional. So Dave would like to know, I was charging $5.95 before COVID, and now most inspectors have dropped their price to around $3.50. This is the dreaded race to the bottom. Trying to stick to my guns. Great, Dave. But business has unfortunately disappeared. That's really crummy. Do you think, this could tongue-tied, revitalize business, or should I have a $4.99 special for pre-listing? The market, go even less. He's 26 years in the business.
That is so sad, and that is so wrong at so many levels. And Brian, to your comment about race to the bottom, who wins in this game? Nobody. Nobody. So, yeah, I don't know what to, I mean, it sounds like people have cut their prices in half, or they're half your price almost. And yeah, I don't know what you do with that. I mean, I'd love to tell you to stick to your guns and provide the value that apparently no one else is providing because they don't respect themselves enough to charge a fair price. I'm interested in, how am I going to phrase this? I'm interested in knowing, and I don't want to start a conversation here because that's not fair to everybody else, but I'm interested in knowing whether the market is down or whether the market is up, because strangely, in our market and lots of markets around North America with the inspectors that I talk to, the number of home inspections and the volume is actually up. Why people would drop their prices in a healthy market is a mystery to me. Why people drop their prices, period, is a mystery to me. But especially now, and especially since in most markets, COVID notwithstanding, I'm seeing a strong real estate market across North America, and I'm seeing lots of sales. Now, there are certainly some areas where that's not the case, and I understand and respect that. But as business drops off, if everybody drops their fees, and I love the 595 starting number, by the way, that I have a lot of respect for that. But if people then go to 495, 395, 295, 195, where does it stop? And at what point does it not make any sense to do this? I'm frustrated by the question. I wish I could grab the inspectors who are dropping their prices by the scruff of the neck and get them to stop doing it. It hurts the profession, it hurts them, it hurts all of their colleagues. Remember earlier in the discussion, I said they're not competitors, they're colleagues. We're a very small community. We need to stick together. We need to support each other. We need not to undercut each other. And I can't say that strongly enough. So I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer to that question. I understand how you're stuck. And I would be doing everything I could to find a different value to bring to prove your worth, and pre-listing inspections might just be it. So that would be my focus. And I've been saying for years that people in our market compete with us, and their prices are invariably lower than us. And I say, well, of course they compete on price. They can't compete on any other level. So I think that you can turn that into a marketing asset. It's a little bit of work. The pre-listing asset value that you bring might tip the scales a bit. At least agents, even if they don't get the pre-listing right away, will understand and respect that you are trying to be innovative. You're bringing something different. You're bringing a new message. And if you can tell stories about how successful it's been, and remember, I said we've done somewhere, I don't know, between 20 and 30,000 of these things. So you to tell agents, hey, it works in other markets, you could be a leader and you could grab the first adopter advantage here. So there are some powerful messages in there, but yeah, competing on price, that would be an absolute total last resort for me. I would be dragged kicking and screaming into a price war. Sorry, Brian, long rant again.
No, your passion trends through, and I'm sure everyone appreciates that. And it's a tough situation there.
Yeah.
20 wants to know, so I often hear from realtors that they're often in a disagreement with the seller on listing price. Do you think pre-sale inspections help realtors justify the decision for setting the price?
Absolutely. And I may have mentioned this earlier in the discussion, but yeah, I think it's a terrific way for the real estate sales professional to have the seller understand that their price expectation may not be realistic. And so having the pre-listing inspection point out the issues in the house, I think is a very useful and powerful tool for the real estate agent.
Thank you. And excuse me. Ed would like to know, is it okay for an agent to accept the terms of the pre-listing agreement, or should it be exclusively the seller of the home?
I would rather the agent, if the agent wants to pay for the inspection, that's fine, but I would rather the seller be the one who signs the inspection agreement or contract. I think that puts the liability where it belongs. The agent doesn't really have any fiduciary interest in the house, so the agent agreeing to the terms. Now, it does happen, even in our world. We try to avoid it, but it happens from time to time. Some would say it doesn't really matter because the person who's ultimately going to rely on the inspection report is the ultimate buyer. So whether it's the seller or the agent, neither one is really an interested party. But for me, it really belongs, the inspection agreement should be between the home inspector and the homeowner.
Thank you. And hey, Fred, it's good old Fred Buck here. What do you think about this idea? Offer a presentation about, offer a presentation to an office that trusts you, have agents that are interested enter a drawing for a free inspection for a seller, give away one inspection and discount inspection to the rest.
I love that idea. It's something I touched on very briefly about doing something for free. And what strikes me about that is that it's innovative. And I love that Fred prefaced the question by saying, talk to a group that you already know and have a relationship with and a level of trust with. And it's perfectly acceptable to say to real estate agents, I can't expect you to take me at my word. It would be far more persuasive and powerful if I showed you that it worked rather than I told you that it worked. And so, yeah, Fred's talking about leveraging that, and that spirit of competition, of a draw for a free inspection or something. People tend to love that sort of thing. And then the twist that Fred asked about that I hadn't thought about was, if you don't win the draw, you're a loser. But in Fred's model, he said, give the others a discount as well so that everybody's a winner. And I think that's great. So you have a better winner, but everybody's a winner. I really like that approach. I think that's very sensible.
Awesome. Hey, and that may complement Daryl. He's got a question. he's struggling to foster that type of relationship with agents. He's been promoting pre-listing inspections for about 2 years, only had a couple of them, so it just doesn't seem to be biting in the Florida market. What are some great, sort of strategies that you might have tried when agents maybe were very reluctant? Is there anything that, outside of obviously what we've talked all about tonight, like, just a really negative market toward the pre-listing?
And if I understand the Florida market correctly, I think a lot of it is pretty hot too. So there's a lot of sales there. And a couple of things. Going straight to consumers strikes me as a tough road. Going to real estate agents and having them say, well, we don't need pre-listing inspections. We're going to sell the house anyway. There's no doubt as soon as we list it, it's sold. People just beat a path to our door. Well, that's great. But the message that I would deliver to agents in that kind of environment is, but do you get every listing that's out there? And again, I'm a very big believer in promoting by asking questions. So when you say to the agent, do you get every listing? And of course, the answer is going to be no. So is it possible that you would get more listings or get almost all the listings or a bigger share if you brought something that nobody else was bringing? Because the goal in that kind of market and the goal for the real estate agent in general is if they get the listing, it's pretty much money in the bank. The trick is everybody's competing for the listing. What do I bring that's different? And don't tell me a lawn sign and MLS advertising and a feature sheet about the house. Everybody's doing. So the agents only have a limited number of arrows in their quiver. If nobody's doing pre-listing in your market, it's a unique competitive advantage, a unique selling proposition for an agent to try, and it costs them absolutely nothing to try it. So I think that is a message combined with what Fred had suggested about offering one for free and maybe discounts to others. You could go to all the offices you work with and make the same offer to each of them, and then you get a multiplier effect to the strategy from the previous question. So I think you need to think outside the box a little bit on this one, and maybe a couple of those thoughts might help a bit.
All right. Well, sir, so we're going to cap off with 3 questions from Andrew. And the first question is it preferred to have a standardized report format that is similar in nature to a general home inspection, or one that is tailored for the agent, such as including an executive summary that highlights good features of the home?
That's a fascinating question because I think, and I understand the context of, let me put forward the positive features of the home and not just beat the home to a pulp like we usually do in a home inspection report. The problem I have with that is you run the risk of the buyer and the buyer's agent saying it looks like the home inspector is trying to sell the house. And especially if the buyer's agent has worked with you before and knows what your reports usually look like. And so if it's not the same report you produce all the time, I think it begs the question, hey, is this inspector working with the listing agent or working with the seller? And is he coloring the report to help the seller move the house? So I think there's a risk. Now, let me go a different direction and say, you might consider changing your report template, and it's something we haven't done, but I've come very close a few times, and I'd love, maybe this is a different topic for a different day, but if you think it's a good idea to put forward the positive functional aspects of the house, and I separate functional from cosmetic because I don't think home inspectors should talk about cosmetic, but does it make sense for home inspectors to talk about architectural laminated shingles having a much longer life expectancy than a builder grade shingle, for example? If there are things, a high efficiency furnace is going to be more cost effective to operate. if you talk about those positives, I don't know that that's a bad thing. And I think I might do it in the buyer's and the seller's inspection. And then your reports are not going to be viewed differently when you're doing a pre-listing inspection. You're not going to be perceived to be promoting or selling the house because that's your standard operating procedure. So I kind of like the idea, but I think to implement it, you've got to go across the board with it.
Question for you, sir. With relation to that, do you not offer, and I believe you talked on it briefly, it's not inside of the main report, but as a supplement, you offer a summary page, which does sort of highlight some of the more positive attributes of the home, no? From a seller's perspective, or is that maybe off the same vein, not the same vein?
It's more of a description, and yeah, we do, and frankly, even within Carson Dunlop, and we've got 16 guys doing inspections, and they do take a slightly different twist. So they will point out the descriptive items. For example, if the house has a 200 amp electrical service or a high efficiency furnace that's 3 years old in the first part of their life, if the roofing system is in the first part of its life. So they will include those descriptive items, but they will include, I mean, the negatives come out as well as the positive. So I don't think, again, even in that one page summary, you've got to be careful not to look like you're promoting or selling the house. Everything's got to be factual and functional related, not cosmetic related, and it's got to be germane and relevant to all of your home inspection reports.
Awesome. And follow-up from Andrew. Is there any increased liability for the inspector with buyers using the report without contractual agreement?
Absolutely. And I think we've touched on that a little bit. So I'd much rather have a contract with them that means that they agree to the terms, but it doesn't always happen. And as I mentioned earlier in my comments in these answers, there is a somewhat increased liability to doing pre-listing inspections, because if you have a relationship and a contract with the buyer, that's great, but that's not always going to happen. And when it doesn't, yeah, I do think you have an increased liability to some extent. Now, again, touch wood, we've been doing it for a long time. It has not been a material disadvantage to us, but I think it would be naive to say that there is no increased liability because you do not have a contract with that prospective buyer.
Thank you. And Andrew's last question is, if the seller wants to complete repairs based on deficiencies noted during the inspection, how are they really verified?
Well, that's the problem. And that's, so I had presented two different models earlier in the discussion. One is that they send you the receipts and maybe photos, and you attach them as an appendix to the report and say the seller reports that these things have been corrected. The other option is to have them removed from the report and deliver a clean report. But the issue around that is you need to go back and do a revisit to confirm that the work has been done. And in our experience, very often it has not been done properly or completely. And now you're into a very unhappy seller having to have stopped the process, gone and got stuff fixed, and then you're still the bad guy because you're not approving the fix and you're unwilling to remove it from the report. So we, as I say, try and stay away from that. It is the slippery slope of having the homeowners want to fix things.
Fantastic, Anne. Excuse me, fantastic, Alan. Well, that actually brings us to the end of our open Q&A, everything that we weren't able to address during our live presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that, Alan. I'm sure people are going to really appreciate getting answers to their questions. And just a friendly reminder, folks, this will be available on our YouTube channel alongside the presentation as of Friday, November 20th.
And Brian, thanks to you for committing the extra time and going above and beyond as always. So that's great. And it's always fun to have the chats. And I do love the questions are so focused and so on topic. It's a pleasure to try and address the questions when they're the level that these ones have been. So it makes it a joy to do. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, sir. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and we'll see you in January.
Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.